we've been discussing the situation around Banco Espirito Santo, and to me there seems to be so many intricate links, a bit like an octopus. The legs of the parent company seem to reach out in many different directions. Perhaps you can explain it from your point of view.
Well, I'll give it a go. It is quite a messy organisation. You have two holding companies in Luxembourg, which are the Espirito Santo International and then the Rio Ferente, and these then own the holding companies in Portugal, Espirito Santo Financial Group, and then that owns the bank. So it's a very multi-layered system, and the confusing part is we don't really know how exposed each part is to the other part of the system. I mean, Espirito Santo Bank has said we have at least €1 billion in exposure to the parent groups, but we also helped sell maybe €1.5 billion worth of debt to our retail and institutional clients, which now might be written down. So, they could be liable for lawsuits on that. And we also know that this has been going on for a year, and these sort of exposures have been trickling out. And now, as an investor, you have to wonder what else is still in there. Do you know the full story? And I think that's why it's been so painful today.
If you look at the particular company, Banco Espirito Santo, the listed company, you can see that this stretches to the share ownership to Luxembourg, France, United States, UK, some of the biggest exposures there. So it tells you who's holding the actual stock. But if you look at the numbers, the actual risk that the bank has said that they have exposed, and they're putting a number on it, roughly about €1 billion so far, but Citigroup has crunched it and they think the exposure risk could be well and truly over €4 billion. What type of position does that put BES in?
Well, I think it puts it in quite a poor position. I mean, the $4 billion would wipe out its capital buffer, and it'd have to go back and raise that essentially again ahead of the AQR and the stress test. And that's something it can't do on the market, so that would require public intervention. And I think one thing that is also becoming clear is now, actually, for all the talk of the Eurozone structures, the bail-ins, the SRM, the single resolution mechanism, and the rules for basically winding up and dealing with bank failures or issues, none of that's enforced yet. So no one knows actually how this is going to happen. So they're starting to realise, okay, well, actually, we're investors, and if a problem happens now ahead of next year, who's going to deal with it? How's it going to be handled? And there's so much uncertainty around that, and I think investors are starting to realise that.
Raoul, the buck stops now probably with the state, the national government, and it's a bit like a Monty Paschi situation. Then there's going to be an argy-bargy of how much the state wants to put in, what do they get in return. This is not a small bank like Monty Paschi, Italian-wise. It's the largest bank in Portugal. So, and Portugal's a small country, and it's got a fiscal austerity program. It's not going to be easy, is it?
Yeah, very much so. And I think this whole idea of the sovereign banking loop being broken or starting to be broken, it clearly hasn't yet. The buck stops, as you said, with Portugal. It doesn't have the money really to inject 4 or 5 billion straight into the bank, and it's not clear whether the bailout fund is yet willing to do direct recapitalisation of banks. The rules around that are hazy. It was waiting until after the AQR, but these are real problems now, and if the losses start coming out and mounting, then you've got a real situation on your hands.
If you look at the major shareholders too in Banco Espirito Santo, you can see that it is this holding company from the founding family. So if they have difficulty, presumably there's no extra money that they can tap. Credit Agricole has been trying to lessen some of its risk exposures, so you would have to assume that they haven't got the cash either. It leaves you with the next three investors: BlackRock, well, deep pockets there, Silchester, question marks, Bradesco. This is the Brazilian investment group, so perhaps they do have a little bit of cash, but you've got to think that there are real question marks around filling that very wide gap. What about the ongoing reputational issues here? Because you mentioned the debt that was sold to retail investors of the bank as well. So obviously that feels as though that could be an issue, along with what happens on the deposit sides, further lending, any other operations of business. How damaging can that be to the trading performance of the bank short term?
Yeah, I think it can be very damaging, and I think they haven't really set aside much or any way in the sort of mechanisms to deal with lawsuits of this level, and deal with both the reputational risk and the monetary risk. So it really could have a big hit on the short term, and it will have a broader hit reminding people that this overhang of banking actions that have taken place over the past 5 years, it's still there. It hasn't been dealt with, and these sorts of problems are still stored up in many periphery banks, which I think, as Bob mentioned earlier, have these old and opaque structures which people haven't really spent enough time looking at in the past year and a half in the run up to the AQR, and they're being reminded that actually there's a lot of maybe hidden risk out there that people should still pay attention to. Yeah.